Hello, welcome to the EdgeWave iPrism webcast today. Thank you for joining. My name is Chu Kim Iskett. I'm CMO at EdgeWave, and I just wanted to do a quick introduction before Scott Hardison, our senior sales engineer, begins the actual webinar. Today, Scott will be talking about trends in web security as well as best practices, and then he'll go over the iPrism product, how it benefits customers today, as well as a quick demo. The actual presentation will be approximately 30 minutes, of which at the end we will be able to address questions and answers, and feel free to send questions during the webinar if you have them, and we'll answer those at the end. As you know, all attendees are on mute, and we'll begin shortly. Just a quick intro on Scott. Scott has been in the security industry for over 15 years. He's specifically been working with the iPrism product for most of that time, and we're very thankful that he's been available today to do the webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Scott.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. For this webinar, I wanted to go over a few things with the current landscape, what we're looking at when it comes to web security, some of the challenges that we face as IT people, and those challenges that we have to take on a day-to-day basis, and then cover some best practices, and then how the iPrism Web Security Gateway can help you do that. EdgeWave is here. We've been around for many, many years working in this environment, and we provide tools that can help you manage that day-to-day activity and protecting your network and managing threats and kind of balancing that access versus threat level type of environment when it comes to internet access. So I want to start out with a little bit of background on the current landscape and how things look out there when it comes to allowing internet access in the workplace. With our partners, some data from them about the different types of threats out there and where most of them are coming from. You'll see a big chunk here comes from web applications and malware, and a lot of that is around the web browser and direct internet access. There are other vectors, and we'll cover that a little bit as well. But these web application attacks and malicious URLs, things like that, drive-by downloads, those type of threats are one of the biggest concerns and hardest things to manage out there right now. And what happens when we are allowing our users out to the internet is we are giving them the ability to basically cause problems for us as administrators and IT professionals. And these criminals and people that are taking advantage of internet access have very different ways of going about it, how they try to get into and access our networks, our data, our resources, things like that. And most of it is coming through in the web browser activity related type of events, whether it just be surfing to inappropriate sites that have been compromised, the drive-by downloads, a lot of it shows up there. So a good chunk of the threats out there and the vectors are coming from, you've got about 65% of it either from web browsers and office applications such as Outlook and your email. So one of the keys in being able to manage this and taking a security-based approach to what access we grant to our users is having the visibility and control in place to be able to manage that access, and what are the keys to managing that risk. So we can't just rely on endpoint solutions, and while we all, I'm sure, have different types of endpoint solutions in place, malware and AV tools running on those client machines, that's simply not enough. And today, one of the big challenges is encryption. With a good chunk of the internet these days being encrypted, going over SSL or TLS-based connections, administrators are losing visibility and control of what the users are doing out there. So we need to get something in place for that, and that's where EdgeWave and the iPrism product can come in to help. Now, when it comes to malicious objects and activity, one of our partners, Kaspersky, here, what they found just in 2015 alone, they identified over 121 million unique objects everything from scripts and exploits, executables, things like that. But what you'll notice is the percentage of those and how they were used in attacks was via malicious URLs. Now, whether those URLs were sites that have been compromised, emails that had malicious URL links in them that people clicked on, things like that. So it accounts for a very large portion of the exposure that we have for our users in allowing them internet access. And what we want to do is come up with a way to provide best practices and what we can do to manage that risk and how we do that. So it comes into different categories. Awareness, meaning, do I have visibility and control of my users' activity and what they're doing? And that visibility is key. And that's where the challenge for encrypted traffic comes in and making sure we can do that. When it comes to our policy management, defining what's going to be allowed for our users, we need to be able to clearly define that, have a tool that will allow us to define that within the tool so that we then have the ability to accurately enforce it. So having some granularity and options in how we define access within those tools is very important. And then we need to take a global perspective. You know, it's not just within local areas and regions. Threats are coming from all around the world, so we need to have a global perspective when it comes to identifying and managing threats. And that's part of the reason that EdgeWave partners with some key organizations out there, such as Kaspersky, with our products to help create that global reach, global awareness, and give us visibility into the threats that are out there. And then we have to take a multi-layered approach when it comes to enforcing it. So again, security at the endpoints, we need it on our servers as well as our gateways, and we need to do that with top-tier vendors, people that are at the forefront of the technology, that are leading the way when it comes to identifying and mitigating threats. And then on top of all of that, we have to also be conscious of compliance issues and regulatory compliance. So for various types of compliance, whether it be HIPAA, SOX compliance, things like that, that will factor into what we're going to do with our policies, how we're going to define them, how we're going to enforce them. But again, a lot of that deals with personal information, banking information. These things are typically all going to be encrypted. So it comes back to having that visibility and control to be able to manage them. And then with EdgeWave, what it comes into is being able to provide security for you for both your web and your email borne threats with our products, ePrism and iPrism. And when it comes to the web side of the house with iPrism, we want to go in and take a comprehensive approach to this. So we've got products in both categories there, and they're combining several different things. One is the latest in technology, artificial intelligence, but also with human intelligence to provide that human perspective. So you can take into more account than just the actual content itself, but also the context of how things are being used. We do this with an approach of trying to build for the small and medium businesses a robust, feature-rich solution that's an enterprise-level product and bringing it into that SMB marketplace. And always keeping in mind that we want to make that product easy to deploy, get it easy to put into your environment, easy to configure and manage on a day-to-day basis to keep your day-to-day tasks down to a bare minimum. And we do that with a lot of automated controls to take care of some of those tasks for you. So with these tools, what we're doing is we're combining technology along with artificial intelligence, human intelligence to provide high accuracy to eliminate things like false positives. And we do that in a way to try and provide you with tools to not only defend against known threats, but also unknown threats. So it's not just about having a list of things we know that are bad. We have to be able to catch stuff on the fly and have real-time analysis of activity to be able to take a look at that, verify that it's clean before that data gets back to our users. So having visibility and control of both their HTTP traffic as well as their HTTPS is extremely important. And in order to have that visibility for that HTTPS traffic, we have to do full decryption of that traffic, and the iPrism offers that for you to provide that visibility and control. And these days we're looking at about 50 to 60% of internet activity is being encrypted. And the forecast is just that will continue to rise as more and more things go encrypted. People are trying to ensure that their data is clean. And year over year, it's growing probably at this point about 5% to 10% a year. So I imagine in the next 5 years or so, we'll be pushing up there at 80 to 90% of all activity being encrypted. But having that visibility and control is one thing. But with compliance issues, we also have to be able to show that we are compliant and show that the tools are doing what they are intended to do. And that's where reporting comes in. So having reporting tools built into the products as well, having a quick dashboard view so we can get alerts and see things that stand out amongst the other activities, get alerts, that type of thing, is very important. And that's all included within the product as well. So how we're doing this with iPrism starts at the basis with the iGuard URL database. That team of analysts are reviewing URLs all day long, every day. Those updates are happening in real time. You get a main database update each night as part of the core database update, but you also get the security related items in automatic updates, and those are done on an hourly basis. So as those are being reviewed and found throughout the day and updated, those updates are being downloaded to your iPrism so you have them as soon as possible, and the iPrism stays up to date automatically. So you don't have to worry about chasing any of this down. This is all automated. We'll have those hourly security updates coming in throughout the day, and then those main databases updates throughout the night. Along with that then comes the tools for active scanning, so integrated antivirus and malware tools. So we need to be able to address those new threats as they come in, the zero-day high-risk type threats, URLs that have been infected or compromised that may be pushing out malware, things like that. Part of that through our partnership with Kaspersky is what's known as the Malicious URL feed. This is a feed that's updated throughout the day as part of your hourly updates. So as sites become known to be infected or hacked, they get added to that list, and they may come off of that list when the owner of the site fixes it, repairs it, cleans it all up. So you may see some URLs that will be restricted, say for part of a day or two, and then when that site gets cleaned, it falls off of that list, and those updates will be reflected on your iPrism, so that access will be allowed again to those sites if that's okay by the policies as they're defined. For the secure traffic analysis, there's a few different ways you can address these things. One is a basic level of filtering or looking at secure traffic, and that's called SNI. It's server name indicator, but that is simply relying on the certificate exchange that happens when you establish a secure connection. While in a good portion of cases that will work fine as far as making a yes or no filtering decision, the downside there is it is encrypted. We have no way of analyzing that data or that request until it gets back to the end user's or endpoint device. One of the side benefits of having the SSL or TLS decryption is not only does it give us that visibility into where they're truly going, but it also allows us then to run those active malware and AV scans at the gateway rather than waiting for it to get back to the client machines. So again, it goes back to that kind of layered approach that I mentioned earlier with tools on the endpoints, on the gateways, on the servers, things like that. So having that SSL decryption is becoming more and more important. It's also very configurable for you as well, and we'll show you how that works a little bit farther on into the demonstration today. Besides that, other threats and ways that end users can either unknowingly or knowingly cause us issues with security threats that are out there. One is botnets. Their machines, they may have something that gets infected. They may bring that in, whether it be via email or external email systems, thumb drives, things like that. Botnets get on systems. It happens. It's just a matter of managing them, and part of the iPrism security features is that botnet protection, making sure that that list of known command and control sites or the phone home type servers that they connect to, what the iPrism is doing is looking at those outbound requests from those machines and making sure that they're not trying to connect to those type of sites and getting to those command and control servers. And what this does is help basically render those bots benign, because without the command and control servers, they sit there and wait for instructions without being able to connect to their home server to get those. But the nice part is because the iPrism is recognizing that activity, it's also logging it. So that will show up in your reports. You'll be able to see that through the malware report or other custom queries that you create, and as well as the dashboard. So that'll give you an opportunity to clean those things up before they cause a problem. The other issue then is circumvention, whether it be anonymous browsing sites or anonymizer type sites that allow you to plug in URLs and bypass filtering, whether it's people going out and using proxy-based systems to try and circumvent your filters and tools. And what they're doing is basically setting up secure connections with the client machines, and then basically funneling the data within that. That can be very risky because some of those anonymizer sites are actually very popular vectors for malware and spyware. So when people use them to try and circumvent the system, it's actually adding additional threat in there, as well as giving them a means to bypass your filtering. And when they're doing that, they're effectively also bypassing your reporting of their activity. The iPrism has several different tools for that. One of them is a category for anonymizers. The other is a anonymizer detection. So it looks at the type of activity that's going on, recognizes that they're trying to, say, connect to a PHP proxy at home that they're going to try and bounce off of, things like that. It'll allow you to have visibility into that activity and give you the tools to be able to stop that, so they're not preventing, so it's preventing them from accessing those systems. So with all of that background in mind, one of the things I'd like to do is give you a quick demonstration on how the iPrism tools are configured and the way that you would want to set up policy to help manage those threats. Now, your individual choices for what's going to be allowed, what's going to be blocked for different users and groups within the organization, entirely up to you. But what I'd like to do is suggest some things that you set at a global level that will help allow you to manage that risk and make sure that the sites that do pose a risk are going to be blocked off for the users. So we want to take a look at the known threats. We want to take a look at the unknown and active scanning. We want to take the categories of URLs that are common vectors of new threats, such as those anonymizers. We want to manage the SSL traffic and how we can take a look at that so we can have that visibility and treat it the same basically as we would standard HTTP traffic. And then also take a quick look at the reporting dashboard and also some reports that you can generate and run to get a view of what's going on the network when it comes to a threat instance. So let's jump into a demo here. Let me switch screens. You should now see my iPrism screen here. I want to start out with policies. Because when it comes down to it, at the basis, we need to make use of that iGuard URL database and the categories they use to rate the content on the internet. And we do that through web profiles. These profiles allow us to go in and take our internet usage policy and define it and apply it to our users, so then we can then accurately enforce it. Now, these profiles are set up with ACLs where we'll use that iGuard database and its categories to make selections. And within here are some choices that we're going to want to ensure are always going to be in place. The first few groups of categories: sex, questionable activities, security exploits. These are things that are very commonly blocked because there's not a valid work-related reason in 99.9% of the cases for people to access them. It's inappropriate material, it's violence, hatred, intolerance, pornography, things like that. Then you have these security exploits categories, which is your known list. This is where that malicious URL feed and the other iGuard tools that are gathering in information about sites that have been compromised, known phishing sites, things like that are listed. So we're going to want to set these up here to be blocked within our policies. A few other choices you'll want to make in here are going to be in the internet group of categories. Here we've got the anonymizer category for the sites that offer anonymous access out to various websites. And then you've got the dynamically detected proxies, which goes along with that. And that is where our users may try to use different tools to circumvent the filtering system to get around it to other sites. And then a little bit farther down, we also have the dynamically detected malware. These are the categories that are used by the active malware and AV scanner, the Kaspersky system that's built into the iPrism and integrated. So all traffic that's allowed by this policy to go out is going to run through that scanner on its way back to make sure it's clean. Now, anything that it finds that it will stop there is going to be classified either as virus or malware or worms, things like that. It'll fall into those categories and automatically be rated as that. So we'll set this up as a default to be blocked for this. Now, in these categories, you're free to pick and choose what's going to be allowed, what's going to be blocked for any given policy for my users. And you have a lot of granularity here. You can change rules by time of day, day of week, things like that. But these policies also have the ability to be locked down. So when it comes to exception handling, people, get blocked from a category and they have a valid reason to get to a URL within that category. They may request an override or an exception to the rules to be allowed out. Well, the lock ACL function built into the iPrism will allow me to take certain categories and block them off from those exceptions. Because they are high risk, we want to make sure that when someone gets an exception, maybe even an IT person may get an exception, say, you know what, let's just open everything for right now. Let me get out and get my stuff, and then I'll close it back up later. We want to make sure that those virus and malware, phishing categories, things like that, are going to still be subject to that filtering. So we'll create what's called a lock ACL. So as part of our best practices when it comes to defining policy, I'm going to take some of these categories, whether it be the entire group of categories, like the first few, the security exploits, things like that. I'll make my selections here for what I want to make sure are always going to be locked off. And then I can tell the iPrism that there are no overrides or exceptions allowed for those specific categories. So those are completely locked down. Now, the other security features, including the malware and virus scan, enabling those, very straightforward process for the malware tools. It's a global on-off switch, so we'll want to make sure that's turned on, so all of our traffic will be subject to that scanning. And then the SSL TLS decryption tools. Again, you have several controls here. We can choose by categories, and this is given to you as a tool by category because there are certain things that you may wish to not decrypt. Whether it comes to compliance issues or personal information. There are certain categories such as the finance and banking category, the health category, or even government websites where users may be plugging in personal information that we don't want to have decrypted. So I can go through and pick and choose by category which of them will be subject to that full decryption. Once we have those in place, it's just a matter then of assigning those policies out to our users. Once we have that done, our users are being filtered by the iPrism. We have our security tools in place. The next stop then is going to come into the reports. The reporting tools built into the iPrism will allow you initially from the dashboard screen to get a quick view of what's going on, one of which is your security incidents. In this case, over the last 7 days, which is what this span is currently, I can say I've only had one event within the malware category. It did indeed block that event, so I know that I am secure from that, but I might want to run a report to find out a little bit more information. Other graphs here will give us information about our users and the most commonly blocked categories and hosts, things like that. If there are certain things that stand out here, we want to run reports. You certainly have the ability to create, let me log in here, sat a little bit too long. You have the ability to create your own custom report queries. You have the ability to schedule them if you need them on a regular basis. And one of the options when scheduling any of these given reports, whether it be the web malware report or web statistics, things like that, we can actually have that scheduled report stored right on board the iPrism. So if you want to effectively archive that report, it may be something you want to run regularly, but not necessarily have to read. I can have it stored right on board my iPrism. And we'll see here under recent reports, these are ones that have been completed. We can see them by their name, when they ran, what type of report they were, things like that. And we have the option of going out, right out and viewing these. So if I want to grab a particular report, I can simply click on that link it'll open up that report right into my browser, and I can get a quick view of what was going on in this case, which was a web top by group report. But in that recent report screen, we can sort these here by name. We can see I've got a weekly user malware report that goes back from January coming in. Let's see here. We can see it all the way up through current days. We can compare one week to the next to see the differences. This may help us understand where things have gone on and when, so we can do some further analysis and investigation into how some of those threats were coming in and what type of activity it was. We may want to go in and change some of our policies. So with this, we've got the tools to be able to not only manage some of that threat and put security tools in place, we've got the ability to report on that, and then we also have the ability, if we'd like to run a real-time monitor, so we can actually watch traffic as it's happening on board the iPrism. Now within the iPrism itself, we can take our get a browser going here. We can go in and see traffic as it happens. Plug this in. We can track that activity. As well as the category ratings and the actual URL. You've got a summary table down at the bottom, kind of giving you a roll-up of the activity that's available within the viewer here. But this is a very useful tool for us, so we can investigate with this as things are going on. If we see things show up on the dashboard that stand out, we may want to go in and monitor a particular user to see what they're doing when these things are coming up. We can search in here if we need to limit the view to certain users, certain activities. We just want to see things like the blocked events and what have you, so we can see what type of categories those blocked events are in. So we'll see all of that show up here. So a very useful tool for us. So a very complete, robust solution to provide web security for your users. Let me jump back then to my PowerPoint here real quick and give you a quick case study example. So one of our clients that came in was looking for web security tools, ways to be able to manage their users' access to the internet and provide them with the ability to allow activity that they needed for their business while still giving users the access they needed. They're a medium-sized manufacturer. They've got 4 different locations, 2 of which are outside the U.S. There was about 800 users in total. They were looking at issues with user access because of their geographic displacement, different types of policies they needed. So they needed some granularity. They had issues with people going out to inappropriate or infected websites. People were bypassing their acceptable use policy with security tool or secure sites and anonymizers, things like that. They'd been hit with a few attacks with some malware, as well as a couple cases of crypto locker type attacks and ransomware. So they're really struggling with trying to balance their access needs with security because of their particular business. They did a lot of web activity and direct communications with customers over the web, things like that. So they came in, they took a look at the iPrism. They very pleased with the iGuard human-reviewed URL database, and what we were able to demonstrate to them in their environment with the iPrism was that they had a newfound visibility and control of that secure as well as non-secure traffic. They were able to take their acceptable usage policy and make sure that they were able to excuse me, actively define that and then apply that to their users and enforce it. And they had several different levels of access for the various users from the different department level within the unique geographic locations that they needed. And one of the other things that they found very positive in there was the ability to do some proactive exception handling. So rather than just purely being reactive to a user getting blocked and having to request something be allowed, with the proactive exception handling in iPrism, they were able to anticipate activity that was going to be happening, go in and proactively put exceptions into the rules for the users, so they didn't have to do it as a reactive type of administrative task. And then of course the reporting as well. Having that real-time monitor was a great assistant to them when they were initially rolling out the product, because it allowed them to verify that the policies they created were working as they expected to, that the right people had the right access to various types of sites, and were also being blocked access to the sites that they needed per their policies as well. So that was a good case study. They bought a couple different iPrisms, got that rolled out. The initial rollout for that in testing with it was a couple hours for the initial setup, and then probably about 6 to 8 hours of fine-tuning as they got used to it in the different geographic locations. But since then, they've been up and running and very happy with the product. So let's roll this up a little bit for a summary. EdgeWave, what we're doing here is trying to provide you with a complete web security solution with filtering, with SSL decryption, malware, and AV scanning. The Kaspersky integration on the appliance provides us with that real-time threat detection and blocking, as well as their malicious URL feed that is helping provide input for the known threats within those security exploit categories as part of that award-winning iGuard database. That database, again, contains millions of URLs, and because it's 100% human review, we're able to take into context how things are being used, not just the content, to allow more accurate filtering, eliminate some of the false positives, which leads to administrative task and headache. The setup on the product, very straightforward, pretty easy in most cases in a user's environment. The typical base level install and filtering is about an hour, hour and a half. To have it up and running, integrated into Active Directory, applying different policies to different groups, things like that. And then the ongoing management is easy because a lot of this stuff is automated, all of the updates, the reporting, scheduled reports, things like that. It's very easy to use and maintain on an ongoing basis. And it's there providing visibility and control of their traffic to allow them to not only provide better acceptable use policy enforcement, but much better security within their environment. And then the reporting and tools helping them be able to show that they are providing that service as they need to for any, regulatory compliance, because part of regulatory compliance is being able to document what you're doing and showing that your tools are working as they needed. And the new proactive exception handling is a great thing to have with it. And I always like to finish off with our tech support team. We've got a great group of people in tech support. It's 24/7. It's all based here in the U.S. at our corporate office or out of our corporate office. There are some remote people there as well, but a great team for support. So if customers have questions or issues, they know they can get in touch with someone here right away and get those issues resolved very quickly. With that, I'd like to say thank you for attending today. If you have any questions, open that up so we can get those answered. We also have another webinar coming up as well for archiving. So if you'd like to join that, there's a URL on the screen for you there. But from there, Chu, take it away.
Thanks, Scott. All right, we do have several questions that have come in. Thank you for asking them. We've got one question with 8.1. Can I restrict the number of logins during the same time interval?
I'm not. I would need a little more background on that, Charles, on what you mean by that. When you say restrict the number of logins, are you talking about the number of users able to go out to the web, or number of logins per machine if it's a shared device? I'm not quite sure how to answer that question without a little more context.
All right, we'll get back to Charles directly. How about, should the end user company have a dedicated person maintaining the iPrism?
With the iPrism and our ePrism product for that matter, does not require a dedicated person. So it's not like I have to go out and hire an IT person to manage this. The day-to-day management on the iPrism product is very minimal. In fact, generally, It's going to be more of a weekly thing. Go in, if there's exceptions, I may have a few, but once we have it in place and policies defined, you'll come up with the exceptions, people needing access, say, oh, didn't realize that accounting needed accessing to this site or marketing needed access to that. We'll tweak our policies or provide the exceptions. But after that, after a couple of weeks of that and making sure everybody's got the access they need, there really is very little ongoing day-to-day maintenance that should be required. Unless you have a very fluid environment where needs are changing constantly, it's not something you should actually have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The reporting, we can schedule them if we have any standardized reports. We can have them emailed out to different managers. We can delegate administrative privilege for reporting access. So if users, want to be able to, or some managers want to be able to generate their own report queries, we can give them that access so they can do it on their own. So no, it shouldn't have to be a dedicated person, but there should be somebody who is, obviously well-versed in the product, so that if there's questions or issues that arise, yeah, they're going to be the go-to person for it, but they shouldn't be dedicated, or their job shouldn't be dedicated to the product. There's just not that kind of administrative need tied to it.
Okay, thanks, Scott. All right, we've got another question here. This is a hosted or on-site MAG solution. If on-site MAG, can I purchase a unit and host it for all my clients?
The iPrism is a on-site appliance-based solution. The MAG actually is the name for our ePrism solution for the appliance-based, and that the ePrism is a hosted solution with an appliance option. The iPrism in its current state is an appliance-based solution that is on-prem.
Okay. Are any of the services restricted if running through terminal services?
No, in fact, that's a great question. One of the challenges that comes up in managing internet access and user policy and enforcing it in terminal services environments, Citrix types environments, can become very difficult because we have multiple users coming from a single source. So how do you determine whose traffic belongs to whom, and how do you manage to be able to maintain unique policies for each of those users? With the iPrism, we do support that terminal services and Citrix type environment, so that from the end user perspective and the administrative perspective, it's no different than if the user was launching a browser from their desktop machine. We're going to authenticate them, recognize who they are, and apply their unique policy to them. So yeah, full support for that environment.
Thanks, Scott. And then we've got a question, can we now track Windows network login versus IP address?
Yeah, the iPrism, by default, the iPrism is going to track all activity by its source IP, so you know where it's coming from IP-wise. You have the option of applying policy at that level and very simply saying, if you're coming from this range, here's your policy. Very effective for, say, like a public wireless, if you're offering free Wi-Fi for customers and guests, things like that. But then alternatively, you have the option to authenticate your users. You can authenticate them against your existing directory structures, whether it be Active Directory, Open Directory, what have you. And when you do that, that will then allow you to apply policy based on who they are. So it'll track them based on who they are through their credential as well as their IP. So you'll have both of those items with each of their events when you turn on that authentication for their traffic.
Okay, great. Then we've got another question here. What kind of security does iPrism offer against ransomware attacks? This seems to be becoming a huge concern lately.
It is, and there's two primary ways that ransomware is getting in. One is via email and attachments. The other is through malicious URLs. So both of our products are aware of these things. That's where the security exploits categories and that malicious URL feed that helps supplement those comes in, as well as the active AV and malware scanning that happens on the iPrism. So any traffic that's allowed to go out by policy, meaning it didn't fall into one of those security exploit categories, and it was allowed out. When it comes back, it's going to get scanned with the Kaspersky tools, the malware and AV tools, to make sure that that's clean before it gets back to the users. And then from the email side, the other second primary vector of where those ransomware attacks come in, that's where the ePrism product comes in. The ePrism product also has several tools in place to making sure that those attacks are not getting through to your users.
Great. And then let's see here. Is there a way to specifically zero in on the website the end user requesting, i.e. MSN.com triggers many objects which make it difficult to investigate an individual search?
Right, yeah. Yes and no. It's a little bit tricky because what you're doing is you're looking at traffic on the wire. So as you mentioned, going out to MSN, it triggers many objects. So just opening a website, you know, whether it be MSN or whatever, you may see 60 or 70 actual events go through. Many of them will be different types of JavaScripts, JPEGs, you know, advertisements, banners, things like that. So it can be a little bit tricky because on the wire, it's no different than as if they had actually plugged that in themselves. The initial request goes out, so typically you're going to see that at the top of the stream of events. So it can be a little bit tricky, but again, it depends on how the web pages are created and formatted, so how they call out the different data that they're going to share. So some sites can be trickier than others. But that's where the real-time monitor can come in as a good tool, as well as the reporting, because you can get the reporting down to a detail level, so you can get it hit by hit if necessary.
Okay. Is 8.1 supported on the H-series iPrism appliances?
Yes, on some of them, yes. It's supported on what's known as the 5 series of the H's. So there, originally with the H-series hardware, when that first came out, there was the 10H, 20H, 30H, 50H, things like that. Then the next round of that came with the 15, 25, 35, 55, 105, etc. Those 5 series platforms are supported with 8.1, as well as the newer G series of hardware that came out last year.
Great.
But the zero series are the ones that are not supported, 10, 20, 30, 50, etc.
Do I need to continue a subscription to Trend Micro for endpoint security?
Absolutely. There is no valid reason to not do that. From a security perspective, like we mentioned early on in the slides, we have to have things at the endpoint. We have to have security tools on our servers. We have to have them on our gateways. You have to take a multi-layered approach, and I would never recommend someone go without endpoint security, whether they've got other tools in place or not, because you don't know, how things are going to come in, whether it be email. It's not going to go through my iPrism and get filtered there if it's email traffic. So if I don't have something on my email system, it's going to come directly back to the client from the server, and nothing's looked at it before it got back to my client. Or the user may walk in and pop a thumb drive into that to load some pictures or whatever that they brought from home, not realizing that they are infected. So yes, we definitely want to continue with the endpoint protection tools, as just one layer of security.
Okay, we've got a few more here. Does the solution discover user via LDAP?
Yes and no. The iPrism doesn't necessarily discover users. What it does is when we define IP ranges that'll be sending traffic through the appliance, we then decide based on that defined range whether or not we would like to authenticate our users. If we choose to do that, then the iPrism will do a true authentication of the user. So there is a credential passing that happens. It then communicates that with our directory to do a true full authentication of the user. And part of that authentication is also getting their group membership info. So once the authentication is performed, it'll query for that group membership so it can make use of that for applying policy based on their group membership.
Okay. And then I get a question, do we still need Java for iPrism to function?
You do not. With 8.1, that was one of the great new features was the new reporting interface. It's all done in HTML5. The requirement for Java is gone. So no longer required.
And then, let's see, last question right now, are users who are not on the domain are required to log in to our wireless, then log into iPrism to get authentication? Is there a way to condense that down to one login?
Typically, there's not there because they are non-domain users and devices. The iPrism, when we define our wireless ranges, we choose whether or not to turn on the authentication for that. So you can pick and choose. If it is non-domain devices or guest networks, typically users or administrators are simply applying policy at the IP level. And then if you need to authenticate them and apply policy based on who they are, then that authentication has to happen. But if they're non-domain devices, the automatic or auto login authentication for the iPrism is not going to work with a non-domain device. So it would be a manual authentication there. So if you choose to authenticate the users on the iPrism, then that would be a second authentication if they are required to log in just to get on the wireless.
Okay. And then let me just loop back, Scott, to that question. It was limit a user from logging into multiple devices at the same time. So this was Charles's question from early on.
Yeah, having the same user for multiple devices on the iPrism is allowed. That is more of a domain restriction that you might set. And so I can have multiple devices within my office using the same user account. So for instance, I've got my laptop, it's connected to the network, it goes out to the internet and goes through the iPrism, and I get automatically authenticated there. I've also got a tablet here in my office as well as my smartphone. All three of those are on the system and on the network. All three of those are authenticated with my credential. The iPrism itself does not have a way to tell it, hey, sorry, your domain logins are restricted here. That's something that would be set at the domain level. And you can do that. You just need to make sure if you turn on domain level login restrictions that you need to ensure that they are still allowed to log on from the iPrism. Because when we authenticate the user, we are doing a true authentication. So it's as if they walked up to the iPrism as a computer and logged into the network. So we do need to make sure that if you put restrictions in place, that they will always be allowed to authenticate from the iPrism.
Okay, we've got another question here. Can the Chrome OS be used for authentication?
Absolutely. Yeah, pretty much any browser is capable of authenticating. For domain authentication with Windows Active Directory, you can do the automatic authentication with Internet Explorer, with Chrome, or with Firefox. For other devices or non-domain devices where the auto login may not be available, you do have the option to manually authenticate, provide a credential, whether it be a domain credential or a credential from a different directory, or even the iPrism can host a list of users and passwords for them to use.
Okay, let's see here. Is there a low-end version for a small office of 10 servers and 50 workstations?
Yes, the 35H appliance, or excuse me, the 35G appliance is the smaller of the units. It's a half-depth 1U rack mountable appliance. But that is the small office box, and then they go up from there, and we've got about half a dozen different models based on capacity.
Okay. All right. I think we've gone through all of our questions, most of them, that is, that I can see.
Sue, I'm sorry. Can I add one more thing to that last question?
Sure.
While that 35G is a smaller appliance, it's physically smaller, and it's for those smaller offices. I wouldn't call it a low-end version. It is simply smaller hardware meant for lower capacity networks. The feature sets and functionality there are identical to all the other units, so all the way up to the full gigabit connectivity appliances. That 35G's got the same feature and functionality.
Okay. You know what? We have one quick question that's come in. We've got a few individuals, I think, on the call who are also our ePrism customers. So there's a question around ePrism and iPrism, and I think so the deployment's different. And if you could just kind of share the difference between the two, obviously, without the obvious is one's covering your email security and one's web security.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The iPrism that we've been talking about in today's webinar is an appliance-based web security solution, and it typically sits just inside the firewall on your local network. It does that in an inline mode or transparent mode, so the traffic's flowing through it on its way out to the internet and having policy applied. Email's a bit different in that you have both inbound and outbound traffic that you need to be concerned with, and so it's done differently. While there is an appliance-based side of ePrism, that is really the exception to the rule. Primarily, it is a hosted-based solution, and the idea there is that we have your email domain set up so your MX records point to our system where you get provisioned in there, so that all of your email scanning happens prior to that email arriving at your network and getting to your email server. So it's a different philosophy as far as location and where the security tools are being deployed for this. Where iPrism is going to manage internet access and what users can get to, what they can't. The ePrism is going to manage email for everything from spam and viruses and malware and phishing scams and all those type of things, as well as provide redundancy and other tools for your email system to make sure that they're available in the case of your email system going down. The users still have access through the continuity tools to be able to access and interact with their email, even though your mail server is offline temporarily till the admin can fix it. So yeah, two completely different products because they're addressing two very different vectors from a security standpoint, as well as two very different types of traffic and communication.
Thanks, Scott.
It's not a matter of choosing between them. It's a matter of choosing tools for both sides of the house, because we need those tools in both instances. So we have many customers with both ePrism and iPrism deployed for their environment.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Okay, I think we've come to the conclusion of our webcast today. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We will archive the recorded version of this and send this out to you in the next couple days so that you can share it with your colleagues and re-listen to it. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact us for any kind of follow-up. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.